exciting episode. We are going to have a very special guest. Yes, today we have a trailblazing powerhouse joining us, someone who has shattered ceilings, transformed the industry, overhead storied decades of career. I'm talking about the one and only Laurie Gilmer. As president and COO of Facility Engineering Associates, Laurie has been a disruptive force for progress for a very long time. She has ushered countless organizations into the future with her expertise in facilities assessments, energy management, and sustainability. But Laurie is more than just an industry titan, as we all know. She's a true leader dedicated to advancing FM, being part of IFMA, and much more. She also serves as National Visiting Committee of Building Efficiency for a Sustainable Tomorrow Best Center and represents IFMA in the Building Industry Decarbonization Collaborative. In our conversation today, the brilliant and the most humble Laurie will give us a rare glimpse into her inspirational path. We learn all about her journey for making waves in the FM field. This is sure to be a riveting and memorable episode with one of the most acclaimed leader in facilities management. Sorry, it has taken me a while to bring Laurie on the show, but I'm super excited for this electrifying chat with Laurie. Thank you, Laurie, for joining Baachu Talk FM. It's a super privilege to host you as a guest.
Thank you very much, Baachu.
Laurie, let's go back to the very beginning. Where were you born? And let's talk about your early upbringing.
Oh, that's going back a ways. I grew up in Northern California, so I'm a native Californian. Grew up in kind of the wine country area, a bit north of San Francisco, where it's a place that, as many places that I travel to, I love coming back home. So most of my family is here. It's just a lovely, beautiful area.
Got it. And growing up, neighborhoods and early schools and stuff, any memories, childhood memories comes to your mind?
I grew up out in the country area, and I remember always thinking when I was a kid, we had some funny things happen, like power would be lost, and if the power was lost, you lost your pump, as your water pump. And so my parents would counsel us like not to flush the toilet, and there's a number of different things that you just don't do. And I remember spending some time. I went to a friend's house one time during a storm, and I panicked a little. I was probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old. And I said, okay, we can't use the bathroom, right? And she looked at me confused. She lived in town, and all of their lines were underground, and they had no such issue with water pumps or anything. And I remember thinking, so this is what it's like to live in town. And I felt like such a country person. But it was so great living in an area where it's just the sky is so dark at night, and there's a certain smell in the air, and I loved it. We moved when I was in junior high. We moved to another town and bought a house in town. So we were on the grid and had neighbors close by. And I remember thinking it felt so confining. We had a fence, and that was a first. It was so odd to me.
Oh.
And I felt like we were confined in this little yard. And I was not used to that. So I really loved where I grew up and have some really good memories of that.
Beautiful. I think when you were talking about it, I was literally floating over there because I'm a village person myself. Once you move into a city or a town, it just brings in what we have been missing for far too long. But I'm glad you're still in the neighborhood, or at least in California, which is just still not bad. So talk us through your school, higher education, and also what did you study?
Well, from the time I was really little, I counted to about third grade. I wanted to be an engineer, which
Oh,
was a little early to be making that decision. But my parents, I went through different testing and things, and so my parents supported that. So all through when I was in junior high,
yes.
the school I went to was very supportive in helping people to line up their 4-year plan. And the 4-year plan was what you were meant to follow in high school to get you into the university that would help support the direction you were going into. And so my 4-year plan was aligned around getting into basically any school that I needed to. It was the CSUs, the UCs, the University of California, California State University, private schools. I had looked at their various requirements and made sure that I was not lacking in anything. So that was one step. And then I wondered when I went to apply for university, I wondered, is this really, as probably every kid wonders, I'm making this big decision. I'm going off to university. Is this really the right step? I'm committing to something that I've studied for a while, but I don't really know if this is really the right step. So I ended up getting into Cal Poly, which is California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California. Great school, excellent engineering school. Their motto is learn by doing. And our family had lived there for a couple of years when I was in high school. So to me, the community was not new. I sort of had my sea legs there for the town. So it was a really easy choice. When I was accepted there, I was so excited and I thought, all right, this is what I'm going to do. So I spent my university time there, met some great friends, had an excellent experience. It was not the college experience you see in the movies where kids are hey, the whole fraternity and partying and all of that. We did not have time for that in engineering school. My roommate and I, on Thursday nights, we would take a break and have roommate dinner. That was one thing we did during the week. And and then we would go out with friends on Friday night. Saturday was your day to do anything you needed to, like laundry or whatever. And then it was back to the books on Sunday and for the rest of the week. So we were I was in school with a lot of very good kids. So we were not messing around or doing anything. I was very focused on education. And um so yeah, I graduated and with a degree in mechanical engineering, I went into I and then I started actually when I was in high school, I got a job at a local consulting engineering firm. They needed someone to help them organize drawings, and I had some knowledge in that, and so they brought me on, and they basically said, you should keep coming back every year. If you keep coming back every year, you can really learn things here. And I thought, okay. And people would give me advice along the way. Like one engineer said his sons were going to Cal Poly, and he said, whatever you do, make sure you finish your senior project, get it done early. Um, that will, if you don't have that done, you can't graduate. And his sons were kind of struggling with getting it done. So there were these little bits of advice that were dropped for me along the way, and I listened. Didn't always know exactly where things would go, but their advice paid off. So when I finished school, I went back to work full time at that firm and worked there for several years. I worked as a design engineer in mechanical. So I did HVAC design and fire protection and plumbing, and worked on some weird projects and interesting projects. I worked on things like testing air systems for a wastewater treatment plant and designing HVAC systems for retail and commercial facilities. I just really a lot of variety, a lot of interesting things. So that was kind of early career for me. It was a lot of variety, a lot of learning, which consulting will do that for you. You get huge variety of problems to solve, and the challenge is how to solve it in the best way for your client.
Totally, Laurie. I think you made it sound so simple, but studying mechanical engineering, that too, like nearly 25 years ago, did you had any female counterparts studying? Because it could be pretty much male dominated, right? Or that sort of perception is a tough mechanical kind of a thing. How was it?
Well, engineering is still very much male dominated field. It's I don't know that that's really changed. The numbers may have gone up a little bit in mechanical engineering. When I was in school, there were always a lot of women in civil engineering,
Mm.
fewer in mechanical, even fewer when you got down to electrical. And so, so my group, I always had maybe sometimes I was the only woman in my class. Sometimes there were two or three others, but usually it was, you know what, I had all along the way, I was used to being in fairly male dominated areas, and that wasn't really a thing for me. For some people, there's a big equality driver. They want to see more women. And for me, that wasn't something I felt like I really needed to take on. It was more of an issue of making sure that I learned as best I could. And I always got along just fine with my peers. So that wasn't really a challenge. Engineering, it would be great to see more women in it. Um, but I don't think I'd want to force anyone to get into engineering just to switch some numbers around. It's a very rewarding field. It's super interesting. Um, but yeah, the numbers haven't changed that much in a since between the time I was there and now, maybe just a little bit.
I totally understand because I had an engineering background and I can say it through because it wasn't easy, for females to just go through. And I saw the passion immediately when he said it. For at 5 years I already made up my mind to get into engineering. I was like, wow, at 25 years I finished engineering and I was thinking, what should I do now? Because I don't know. This is amazing. So finished up your degree, then did you started your career in mechanical engineering, or how did it gradually took you to facilities management?
Well, that's it's an interesting story. So I spent a lot of time, every summer I would go back and work for that one firm. And I was working on increasingly more responsibility. Eventually I became a project manager. And at one point I worked with a client who was a facility manager. And he said, I want you to come and help us. We've got a lot of changes happening in our facilities. And we need someone that we can work with. We want to build a relationship with someone. And we think you could be that person. Well, I was a pretty junior person. I think I had my professional license by that point. But even then, I felt like I was on the early side and thinking, you want to work with me? I'm very flattered, but oh my goodness, that is huge. And I didn't want to disappoint. So I ended up working, with the support of my boss and my team. I ended up doing quite a lot of work with that particular facility manager. And that was when I think I kind of caught the first bug. What was exciting about it is I got to work with real people solving real solutions as they happened. So they would have something going on where they needed to convert a facility from one type to another, or they would have an issue in a particular area and they needed to know, what do we do about it? And so I'd drive over to their building and I'd look at what their issues were, and then we'd figure out how to help them. But it was that interactive client engagement that I so enjoyed. And I realized after a time, consulting on the design side tends to be a very solitary experience. You're in the office. You go in the office. You go to your desk. You run calculations, load calcs. You design things on paper. You help. Now you design things in CAD, and you work with your design team to kind of turn your concepts into something that can be constructed. But largely your time is billable hours in the office and being highly productive. I enjoyed getting out and talking with people and solving issues there. There's still the element of writing up reports and figuring out solutions and coming up with that. There's still an office component, but I really liked going out to see and do and work. I loved the people side of it. And that surprised me a little bit, because
Mm.
I had always thought of myself as being very shy. So that changed. And so I ended up, um, so a friend of mine had suggested that I talk to another friend of his in the industry, and that ended up leading to a different job. And so I became a consultant of a different type. It was more of a facilities consultant. And from that, so then I used my design background, and it was very foundational. It's very good when you understand what it takes to put a system in place and how theoretically it should operate. And then you compare that to the reality of how systems are actually operating. It's a really good delta gap that you can build. And so in the end, I had a really good appreciation by this time for how the decisions that are made in the office and in the construction during the construction of a facility. I learned kind of what can go wrong and what happens for the facility manager on the backside who's having to manage that. And I thought, oh my goodness, some of those things we used to talk and laugh about or joke or design or whatever. And we'd say, oh, someone will worry about that in 5 years. And now I'm with the people who are having to worry about that in 5 years. And I thought, oh my goodness, that was, I feel bad. But but it's a perspective. It's something that you learn. So I've used that background help in what I now do on the consulting side and helping people navigate the issues of facilities.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I think you're destined to come here. So do you remember your very first FM project, Laurie? And any memories?
My first facilities project.
Or was it
Um,
before when you were in the LIMS?
One of the first active facilities projects I can think of. I remember there was this is a fun story. There was a uh, a manufacturing. It was kind of manufacturing a research firm, and they had this. They used a lot of nitrogen, and it was nitrogen of different pressure grades. So they had what they called six packs, and where they would have these bottles. They're the sort of the tall bottles that are about 3.5 feet high, and they're in a rack, and whoever the delivery company will come in, they'll deliver a rack, and then it'll get connected up, and off the air goes to wherever it needs to go to. So they had that for high pressure nitrogen, and then they had, I think it was their low pressure system. They used liquid, so they had this big tank, and the tank would run to vaporizers, which would flash the liquid into vapor, and then the vapor would get pumped around the facility. There were some issues with it, though. There were some neighbors in the surrounding area that when the nitrogen truck came to deliver nitrogen, it was really loud. The guy had to back up, and there's this really beep 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 sound that in the area it created a sort of a reverberation of noise that one of the facilities people said he called it Carnegie Hall, and he said this is like Carnegie Hall and everything's echoing and the neighbors can hear perfectly. Well, the neighbors were not happy about these deliveries. Never mind that the neighbors had moved in, they'd built their places well after this location had existed, but nevertheless it was a headache for the facilities people because you get neighbors complaining and taking pictures and photographing delivery times and that sort of thing. And so they were trying to figure out how they could minimize the noise. So they built some big gates. They called them the Jurassic Park gates that helped separate where their deliveries were from what everybody else could hear. And they had acoustical panels to help absorb some of the sound, but it didn't do everything that they wanted it to do. So they ended up between that and then also just needing to increase the size of their nitrogen system and have a better way to deliver more nitrogen. They ended up designing, they needed a larger nitrogen tank. And anyway, long story short, this is getting very long. They ended up putting in a brand new nitrogen system, racked everything together, cut down on the number of deliveries, and relocated where their fill port was. So it cut down on the noise, on the amount of noise, cut down on the number of deliveries they would have. So you didn't have quite so much beeping. It was an attempt to be both economically wise, as well as cut down on noise for the neighbors. So win-win on many points. That I remember stepping into the middle of that one and realizing this is ever so much more than just getting a bigger tank because we want fewer deliveries because it's cheaper. There's this neighbor component that we have to care about. This is a people business, no matter what we do. And so as good stewards of our resources and good stewards of those that we're interacting with, we need to find better solutions. And not only that, we also need to message that to those around us. So that was a very memorable project for me.
Totally. What a fascinating project, really. I mean, like when you were talking about hydrogen and nitrogen, I was like, oof, I mean, like, that's very interesting. So, Laurie, I think over the years, to talk us through your career all the way to your current role at Facilities Engineering Associates, Laurie, and then we will get into some interesting stories in between.
Sure. Well, Facility Engineering Associates, or FEA, that was my second job. That's where I currently work. So that's been an interesting trajectory. So I've been at FEA for, we'll just say, a very long time. I started out, early on, I was doing more mechanical things, and eventually my through exposure and experience, you're always learning. In any job. I think you're always learning, always growing. And one of the things that we do is go out and visit a lot of facilities. We see a lot of different issues in in various kinds of facilities, and they're as varied as the people in the buildings, um, and the systems that are designed. And so I've had to assess and solve so many different issues. I mean, some of the or one issue, I'd never seen this one before. We were at a national park location, and we were helping them figure out how to plan for the replacement of a historic lean-to. Well, it wasn't really historic. It was built in the style of historical correctness. So think about this thing was it was this wattle material. So you have a lean-to that looks like it's made of sort of scavenged sticks and poles and things. And it was tied together using, I think it was strips of deer skin. It's trying to figure out how to help them plan economically for that. I thought, my goodness, what is the cost of deerskin strips? How does one figure that out? That's not something you can look up in memes. You have to have other local resources you can go to and talk with about how they would put something like that together. So that was definitely an odd one, but it's real. It's out there. You have to get to the bottom of it.
Mm.
So that was figuring out that kind of thing. I've done that. One of the most interesting projects that informed some really early learning was a project that I mostly can't talk about. But I remember that the charge was, without being able to see a majority of the system in the building, the people in the space thought that they needed additional air conditioning. And I ran every test and estimate I knew how to run. And I kept thinking, there is more than enough here. Something else is wrong. The answer is not let's replace or let's upgrade the system. This just does not add up. And so I ended up giving them a report, sort of a triage of things to do. It was kind of a, let's go with the low hanging fruit, do this, do this, do that. And it turned out one of the things that was the thing that was really the big problem is their coils hadn't been cleaned. So they were dirty. And so they cleaned the coils, and all of a sudden they had better heat transfer, which, for this mechanical engineer is near and dear to my heart. So they had better performance, and all of a sudden their problem was solved.
Uh,
And I took great pride in that because it felt so simple and so basic. And I was really glad that they didn't have to go through and put in brand new equipment or chase some bizarre design. I was glad it was so straightforward. It took some doing to figure out that was the issue. But it was things like that you find, that you realize we've just got to put our thinking caps on and figure out how to help. Sometimes the right answer is let's upgrade the equipment or let's replace or whatever. Um, but it's equally rewarding when you find alternative ways of working through a problem. In this case, it was let's just exercise some good maintenance and care. And that's stepping into that facility management role and looking at, how do people care for systems? What should be done? What might be a problem? What do we know about how facilities are cared for? And what are the possible issues? So
any follow-up questions I had, Laurie already answered everything. So I am now thinking, because I was thinking to ask you, what's the most memorable facility you I ever assessed in your career and why? I think already given few. Is there any other thing that comes to your memory, Laurie? I mean, like good, bad, for various reasons, or the
I
biggest?
have one other that we finally call the smell test project. In a sort of funny reference, we call it, I think, the olfactory test. Anyway, basically a smell test. There was a building. It was a rather nice one in a downtown area. It was fairly newly built. I think it'd been in operation for maybe, it was somewhere between a year and 2 years, I think, by this point. And it was a certified facility, so it had a LEED plaque on it. But in the bottom, in the ground floor of the building, they had a problem with odor. Well, they had a restaurant, and they had a restaurant. And there was a tenant area they were trying to build out. It was unfinished. They wanted to get a tenant in there, but so far the tenants had been going in, and none of them wanted. There was a spa, I think, that was thinking about going there, but they could smell kitchen smells, and that was not present or pleasant. And especially when you think about what a spa experience should be, you don't want to be smelling today's lunch when you're in the middle of whatever that experience is. So they had tried all sorts of things and they were just at their wits' end. And they said, I think someone out of desperation, can you come and help us? And so I said, sure, okay, absolutely. And so I devised a test. And I remember one of my colleagues with me looked at me like, is this really going to work? Said, we are going to try. I think it will, but this is what we were going to do. I know all the things I have tried. So we went through kind of some of the basics, the basic approaches, but I ended up, after inspecting everything that I could in this duct system, I took a bottle of oil of lavender, which, if you've ever opened up a bottle of essential oils, oil of lavender is really, in quantity, it is very overwhelming. Yeah, it'll give you a headache if you have too much of it. So, and I had been doing a craft a few weeks before and had been working with it, and I thought, my goodness, this is a perfect tracer oil. So I took some drops of that in a Q-tip. The engineers that were escorting me looked at me like, "Are you kidding me?" And I said, "I am not kidding you. We are going to do this." So I put drops of oil of lavender onto Q-tips, and I put that into the airstream. And the theory was, this is a markedly different smell than a restaurant smell. It
Mm.
is after the charcoal filter. So we should be able to pick it up if there's a leak. We couldn't pick up anything else any other way. And then they had run smoke tests and all sorts of things and couldn't figure it out. Well, we figured out the problem. So, and it was the oil of lavender. So we basically followed our noses to where the smell was making its way out, and we figured out what the issue was. So they were able to address it, and hopefully they rented the space out. That wasn't in my purview to figure that out. I was just there to help them figure out how's the odor getting back into the space. We have welded duct, and it's the integrity of the system appears to be solid. What's the problem? So walking that down, that was really fun. And the guy, one of the engineers at the end of it, he was one of the building engineers. He said, "I've got to tell my wife about this tonight. She is not going to believe this." And I loved it. That was again another really simple solution to a complex problem that had been haunting them for months. And hopefully it helped them rent the space.
Totally. I mean, like, in addition, I'm sure you might have a checklist of how you need to do a facilities assessment or something. But behind that, this sort of creative thinking, or, thinking at your toes, like this facility, obviously you might have done multitudes of buildings, right? Like what you just said. I mean, this like a spy novel to me. It's like, go to the facility, what's not working. My God, you see, it's an art in itself. You should write a book about assessment. It's a separate skill set. I don't think because you can be technical, but still there is a creative element to it, to just see or think out of blue or out of blocks. That's amazing. So after you did the facilities assessment, what brought you to sustainability?
Well, that was sustainability, not really a new subject, but at the time, I want to say that first hit my radar as a term. Well, it was actually, I remember the first lead manual that I ever saw, and that was back when lead was all in a binder that you had to submit. Um, and that was when I was a designer. That was when people thought of sustainability. Certainly in the design world, we thought of things like waterless urinals and low flow bathroom fixtures and bike racks. And like those were the big things you'd get points for. What really got me into it though was later working on the facility side of things and looking at the bigger outcomes and recognizing that things like bike racks and low flow fixtures, while those were certainly part of the picture, that wasn't really going to get us to where we need to go if our worldview was that small and that focused. And so trying to kind of raise the level of conversation and look at a much bigger picture at the thing that we're trying to solve, that I found fascinating. And part of that
Mm.
in IFMA, so my journey ended up taking a very IFMA tone. IFMA, I think IFMA started really playing with it around 2008. I gave a presentation with a friend of mine. She was a facility manager. And me and my team, we had helped her facility go through LEED certification. Well, we learned a ton in that and ended up doing a big presentation at World Workplace. And I remember thinking at the time, how do we help other people? Like, this is a really great story to tell, but really the whole point is, how can you learn from someone else's experience, whether or not you ever go through certification or whatever? The bigger point is resource effectiveness and making sure that you are responsible with the things under your care to the best of your ability. That's always been a charge, whether we call it sustainability or not. I believe that's something that we owe it to those around us to manage our resources well. So yeah, that was something taught to me as a small child. So to see it a little bit more programatized and then to work on getting our arms around it in a way that more people could get behind it and you could sustain that bigger picture. That was what was fascinating to me. So I ended up um, I think IFMA started offering the SFP. We had our first world workplace that was Phoenix. I want to say 2011, we taught the sustainability facility management program. And I got to teach the inaugural class along with some other colleagues of mine. So, and helping people to attach to that larger message of sustainable facility management. That was exciting and interesting. It was really fun to see people um, change in their thinking. I also I learned lessons like, how do you deal with thorny issues, terminology that we don't like, terminology that can be divisive. There's still things like climate change and um, what was the global warming? That was the big one for a while. It was global warming. And in any one class, you would have a section of people who are completely on board with it. And then you would have another section in the class that would say, that's not happening, that's not true, that's just made up or whatever. And I remember at first thinking, how are we going to get through this? And then I realized it actually doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you believe. It matters what you manage and how you navigate. And so I started in the beginning of the classes after that, I started with that. I basically said, we're not here to convince you that global warming or climate change, that this is happening or not happening. And in fact, it doesn't matter. What you're here to do is help how to learn. You're here to learn how to help your company navigate that issue and think environmental stewardship. Most of us can get behind wise use of resources. So
Mm.
let's think about it as that. And if climate change is a great driver for you, totally fine. If it's not, don't let that hang you up. You still have a part to play and a job to do. So it was kind of reframing that. I love thinking about how people think. I love studying that. I love reading books about how the mind works. That is just fascinating to me. And so helping to be part of that equation of helping people move forward, I
Mm.
find really exciting and inspiring.
Totally, totally, Laurie. I think your curiosity is always there, right? I mean, like, because you started from mechanical engineering, you were curious about the FM, and every facility you assessed also taught you a lot more. And energy is just an bolt-on sustainability to everything else. So, so as you might have find enough, because now when the mold moves into sustainable future, is there any experience or story comes to your mind where that's just one creative way that you helped or assisted a client to bring their facility or operations? Anything?
That's a good question. I probably helped more on the program side, not in the specific implementation side. I mean, the things that always come to mind immediately are things like plumbing fixtures and roof gardens, and what are we doing about that? The number of attempts that I've seen on things like putting roof gardens up and expecting that's going to solve our problems. Those are the ones I just look at and think, oh, well, maybe, but you've got to have a much bigger plan that's bigger than just let's stick a bunch of growing things on a roof. There's so many other things to think about. One thing that does come to mind was a sustainability project I worked on years ago, where the team it was another certification effort. They were going through certification, and they had achieved it, but they really wanted to push their own envelope, and they said, what else can we do? And one of the facilities people had been on the roof, and this was an enormous event space facility. They had lots of air handling units kind of tucked in and around the facility, a lot of units on the roof. And they said, we're in a dry area, and we've seen how much condensate is coming out of our mechanical units. And we're wondering, is there enough that we could water our plant life around the facility? Can we divert it? Well, it takes a little bit of knowing how and figuring out to work that out. You have to have a way to collect the water and store the water and then get the water to where it needs to be. And there's certain parameters to think through with that. So we said, all right, let's start with a theory. Let's just look at how much condensate do we think we're getting? Let's just start there. And so the first thing then was to kind of draw the bubble around what are we going to evaluate? And we kind of quickly moved to certain mechanical units were just never going to be a part of the solution because where they were located, it was going to be too costly and complicated to try to get the water to flow where we could get a collection point. So we kind of put parameters around rooftop equipment and of this sort and of this kind, and what would the amount look like? And so running those, using that design experience, figuring out then how much condensate could we expect, and then comparing that to how much water they use to water their plant life. That was kind of fun and interesting, helping them resolve that. And again, and that was more of a theory exercise. I don't know if they actually ever implemented it, but it was exciting to be part of the thinking. And you could see that team had changed in going through this process. They had changed and were starting to think about waste and how to waste less. And so they're looking at condensate dripping and going, can we repurpose it? Which, I was glad to be a part of that experience and realize, yes, we can do something. Here's what it would look like. It's going to cost something. So now we have choices to make. You have a resource, you can deploy it. This is what it might look like. So, so helping people think through those, I find that to be a lot of fun.
Totally, totally. Or as you rightly mentioned, because you always have this theme about sustainability initiatives. People talk about it, people put in all their initiatives, but then it always gets deprioritized. But you always have this facilities manager who's like, okay, talk about this, but we don't have budget to do this.
Yeah.
It's always the part. But two hypothetical questions. So if you could have a magic wand and change one thing about the typical workplace, what would you change?
The typical workplace, like the office environment, and I love good spaces that are inspiring and interesting to be in, like the kinds of spaces you walk in and you think, oh, I could work here. I could see myself setting my laptop up right here. I think it would be lovely if we could have more of those spaces available to people. I think we're getting really good at design these days and paying attention to things like some people like quiet areas and need lots of quiet, and other people really want people around them. And let's create a variety of spaces. I think from a workplace perspective, that's one thing that I would love it if we could all have wonderfully creative spaces that we're inviting to all the personality types that we have. It's a tall order, and I would love to inject things like, let's have great airflow and thermal comfort and good light quality and lovely atmospheres. If I could wave a wand and just achieve that goal without having to measure it or pay for it, that would be fantastic.
Totally, totally. I mean, like the world is moving on, and we moved away from work from home into some elements of working in the office, and there are a lot of initiatives happening, as you rightly said. So, again, so if you could pick any historical building and say, what, I want to be the facilities manager for that historical building, which one would you choose? Anything?
Historic buildings are challenging. I think somewhere like I think the Capitol building would be interesting. The Capitol has such a rich history. It's such a cool space. Something I'm always really attracted to government buildings, like these big, beautiful things that have been around for a couple of centuries. In other countries have been around for even longer. I find those places fascinating, and it's not just it's some of the old technology and how they work It's they were built, well, many of these places were built before we had systems like air conditioning and before we had electricity. And so they had to figure out how to light them and how to provide ventilation. And they actually had some really good systems to do that. It's not perfect air conditioning like we expect today, but really good ventilation and workable systems. I think those buildings are just fascinating. So yeah, maybe something like the Capitol building would be interesting. They do have their issues. They tend to have issues with it's related to age. They'll have their fun leaks and structural challenges and then there's usually the renovations that have occurred to bring new systems in place and figuring out sometimes the renovations that were done, especially if they were done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, those create some challenges. I think every facility is going to have its bit of a nightmare, but equally it's a bit of interest. So the historic buildings, they have that fun bit of preserved story that is resonant in them.
Totally, Laurie, totally. I mean, it's on one end it's interesting, on the other end you do need to preserve them carefully, because I think yesterday I interviewed the Africa chair of IFMA, Sharif, and then he was talking about the most ventilated building you would ever find, which is still existing, is the pyramids, because
Oh yeah.
yeah, if you go there, it's built 5,000 years ago. You don't need anything. Where does the light come from? Where does the ventilation kicks in? And it was fascinating. So yes, so that kind of nicely bring me into IFMA. At what point in your career did you come across IFMA, and what motivated you to get involved?
It was early on. It was actually my facility manager friend who ended up changing the trajectory of my career. He was the one who said, "I think you can come help us at our facility." He was very involved in IFMA, had been for years, um, and so he recommended it,
Mm.
and I joined IFMA, and I thought, all right, and it turned out when I changed companies, my current what is now my current company was very involved in IFMA. So my first world workplace I went to in San Diego in 2006
Mm.
um, as a brand newbie to FEA and to IFMA, and boy, I had to find my sea legs.
Totally. From being a member, as you call newbie in 2006, to becoming the chair and now past chair of IFMA Global Board, talk us through your IFMA journey and how was it? Because you already had a very, I mean, like, even though you know, the career is not easy, it's very um, what we call time intensive, people friendly, time intensive, family on the other side, then volunteering for IFMA. That itself is full on, but going and serving all the way to IFMA Global Board and now being past chair, talk us through your association with IFMA and why do people need to go beyond, join IFMA and also go and put themselves forward to IFMA's Global Board?
There is so much you can learn by giving.
Mm.
I have had since I was probably in junior high school. I've always been in volunteerism. I hadn't really thought about it until I had to write up a resume, and I realized, my goodness, I've done a lot of volunteer work. And IFMA is one of those things. And I look at it as certainly a place to learn and grow, um, but also a place to give back. And I find that when I give to others, I learn so much more. It's not if you go in like you're going to sort of hoover up knowledge, it's kind of a limited path. You're sort of not really interacting with people the same way. But I find when I contribute, I learn so much more, and it's a much more valuable experience. So with IFMA, the key, I think, with any organization that you get involved with, whether it's IFMA or, for me, it's groups like ASHRAE and others, it's finding your fit and figuring out how you can play your part well. Not everybody is going to be wanting to give presentations or teach or lead in a chapter or what have you, but there is something that you're going to be good at that you can contribute to. So I had to find out what that was for me. For me, I did end up getting involved in chapter leadership, somewhat at the encouragement of my friend. I also got involved in teaching and instruction, so instructing for IFMA's programs. So in presenting, so this is another thing that I was really shocked about. I put in for a presentation at World Workplace, and I think it was 2008 was the first one. And I had done a few presentations before that, and I was it was a little nerve-wracking, but we had a good message. This is when we were going to talk about a LEED Platinum building, and so this friend of mine, a facility manager, and I put our presentation forward, and it was selected. And so we had to figure out um, how to do a standout presentation, but also put that cap on of how are we going to make sure that we help others, because this is not about us. It's about us for the moment. We're there up on the stage, but if you're really going to make an impact on people, you have to help them attach to some part of your message so they can take it and move forward. And hopefully they'll be inspired by what you did to do something themselves. So having to craft that message, that was part of the journey. I eventually started teaching programs for IFMA. Sustainability program was the first one. And then I ended up teaching the facility management program. And I was involved in different other committees and things, committee work. Um, and a lot of volunteerism efforts, whether it was with our local chapter or kind of at a larger level, teaching classes around the country, oftentimes teaching at World Workplace. That ended up leading to eventually I applied to join the board, and I joined the board in 2016. It was the 2016-17 year, and things just kind of moved from there. But it's always, for me, it's been important to have that idea of remember who you are, remember what you're contributing. That this is not about you and your accomplishments. This is about you and what you give. And so I I've contributed in a lot of different areas to IFMA. I found it very rewarding. I love when people learn when they learn something and when they tell you, wow, that was a great presentation, here's what I learned. And or wow, I got my certification, and I was in your class a year ago, or I was in your class 3 months ago, and I remember this thing you said and it was great. And I'm like, yes, good for you. And you can see people growing in their own journey. So that is just, it's so rewarding, and it's part of that community that you build. So for me, I guess it's been a lot of service, and it's also recognizing that IFMA is a community. It's a very relational community, and it's representing the facility management profession. And the big thing I think for me also in that journey has been recognizing that IFMA's by no stretch the only game in town. It's the largest game in town, I think, globally. But what's really most important is that people learn and grow, and that profession, that we're contributing well to the profession. I have a way that I do it through IFMA, and I love how the part that I get to play, and I love seeing others get to engage. Um, but it's always keeping that bigger picture in front of us that I think helps us do our best.
Totally. Again, being a global industry body, there are this, people might say it's US centric, but it has evolved, as you might have seen, all the way from 2006 when you joined. When was it, San Diego? When you said all the way to now. So, what have you seen? How has IFMA and also the wider FM industry evolved over these, say, 20 odd years, Laurie, from the time you've seen it?
Oh, good question. So the facility management profession is one that is ever adapting and changing. I have a friend of mine called it used to be the profession of roads and commodes, which I always thought that was kind of a funny phrase. So she, that was kind of back when people thought about facility management being very operational. You're there to deal with janitorial services, and you're there to deal with things when they break. Well, that was facility management at one time, and many decades ago, well before, I would put it before the 80s, certainly. But the FM profession has not been well recognized. I think the pandemic did a lot to really put FM on the stage. So the profession has grown and changed. What it has tended to do is something new will come up, like in the 2000s, it was sustainability, and for a long time we thought, oh, sustainability is going to be this special separate thing. FMs need to know about it, but it's something special and new. Well, it ended up getting incorporated into facility management, much like so many other things did. So Facility management, I find to be a highly adaptable profession that basically just continues to follow what is needed in facilities. So as facilities become more complicated, as the people in them become more needful of different accommodations, the facility management profession is the one that's helping to provide it. So um, I see it as this continually evolving thing. And I look now at, what is it we're dealing with now? It's sort of cyber safety, cybersecurity, AI, chat GPT, like all these little phrases come in. I would roll it up into a technology bucket. We've got a huge shift going on with technology right now. And the big question for the FM is, what does this mean for us? What do we need to know? How do we need to navigate this? We don't have to be the technology gurus, but we do understand that changes will occur. And one of those things that changes in technology tends to invite is security risk. So and one of the changes we've seen is the connection between the IT and the OT world. So we've got operational technology. We also have the physical world that's starting to see a run-in into the technology side. And the facility manager has to be on top of understanding what the risks might be and figure out who do they need to work with to get their arms around that risk and manage it. So, so there's that. There's what are some of the other things? So sustainability has kind of always been there. It's kind of popular again right now. So it's my expectation for facility management. I think it's that it's going to continuously grow, evolve, and adapt. And that's one of the things that I think we try to do in IFMA is equip people to be of that mindset of growing and adapting and always learning, keeping that big picture ahead of them in what is the essential mission of the facility manager? What is it you're there to do? It's not just to make sure that the lights come on every day, though that's a part of it. It's not to make sure that your PMs get done, though that's a part of it. You're delivering a result on behalf of your organization that allows people to do their best every day at work. Whether it's maintaining a great environment so that people can comfortably do the work and have great productivity on behalf of the organization. BFM is playing into that overall picture. So that, those are the big things that I think lots of little changes are going to happen in the industry. They will continue to do that. I don't think that can be helped. It's just how we navigate it. It's kind of always the question.
Totally. I think I had 4 or 5 questions as always, Larry, but you
Sorry.
kind of answered everything, and then now I'm scratching my head. What's next? So if because I think one of the questions which I had was if you could require all future facilities management to master that one skill, what would it be? I think you alluded it already, but in any case, just summarize it for us, Laurie. What would be?
I would love to know what you think I alluded to. I think one of the skills the FM needs is there's a hardcore learnable skills, but it's dealing with people and sort of that dealing with people and navigating that big picture. I think that is an essential skill for any FM. It's having a bigger mindset than just yourself or your team. Don't put the blinders on, but realize there's a bigger world about you and understand you do have to focus. But there's a bigger picture, and part of what you're trying to figure out as an FM is what is the bigger picture? How do I need to attach to it? And how do me and my team play into that? What is our function that we need to carry out? But always keep that big picture in front of you.
Totally. Thank you, Laurie. Laurie, we talked a lot about your professional career. Now it's time to know a little bit more about what Laurie does when she has some free time, when you're not actually working on FM. Talk us through what's your hobbies and interests, Laurie.
My hobbies, goodness. Well, I do. I told you earlier, I have a lot of family around, so I spend a lot of time with family when I'm here. I have family and friends, and I enjoy cooking for my family and sort of those entertaining kinds of things where you get together over a meal and have a chat and you find out a little bit more about people and just spend time with one another. I really enjoy doing that. That's probably the thing I do the most actively with others. And I enjoy other things like um, on occasion skiing when there is snow and when there's availability. I used to do a lot of cross country skiing. I haven't done it in a while, just time and busyness and all of that. But my goodness, that is really fun. I enjoy those things that are probably a little more quiet activities. I enjoy that time. I use small group activities with people where you have the quiet of the moment and an activity to engage in, and that's really fun. I love playing cards with people. That's another one of those things where you can enjoy playing a game, and there's sort of something to do while you talk. And I love that. I love doing that. I like spending time with people, and
No,
a good activity is can be a really good part of that.
100%, Laurie. So let's go into a rapid random fire question round, and then we'll get into the light-hearted round next. So, sunrise or sunset?
Oh, probably sunset. I hate getting up late,
Really?
and I'm not a morning person. I just hate being late, but I really enjoy the evening.
Good. Coffee or tea?
Tea right now.
Okay. Fiction or non-fiction?
Nonfiction.
Fiction. Okay. Mountains or beaches?
Mountains.
And do you remember the last book you read? Or the book, your favorite book?
I'll give you one of my favorite books. There's two. Blink by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
I loved that, about decision making, and Predictable Irrationality by Daniel Ariely.
So that's a very dense book, but yeah.
Really interesting.
That's good. Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate.
Ooh. Phone call or text?
Phone call.
Comedy or drama?
Comedy.
Workout indoors or outdoors?
Indoors. Need the air conditioning.
Freshly cooked dish at home or takeout with friends and family?
Freshly cooked dish at home. Absolutely.
Totally, totally. A day spent in the garden or a day lost in a novel?
A day spent in the garden.
Okay. Hosting a backyard barbecue or a dinner party inside?
Either one depends on the time of year.
True, true. So you prefer
If
both?
it's if it's summertime, out in the backyard, definitely. If it's wintertime, at home and in the quiet inside is fine.
Got it.
The whole
Obviously,
point is hosting.
ah,
Oh, sorry.
100%. Obviously, you like kayaking and skiing, but given the choice, what would you prefer? Kayaking on a serene lake or a ski down snowy slopes?
I think skiing.
Oh, that's very
Get a bit of
intense.
speed. It's
Yeah.
fun.
What's the furthest cross country that you have done so far? I mean, like, have you done in the past?
I don't know how far. We used to go, well, there's Royal Gorge up at Tahoe. They have groomed trails, and they're miles and miles and miles of groomed trails. So you're going out for a day, you take a backpack and a lot of water, and off you go for the day. That's really fun. So however long that takes, I have no idea how far that is.
Totally.
It's a loop.
That's amazing. I mean, like because I'm a nature person myself, but that's beautiful. Among the dishes you enjoy cooking, which one is Laurie's signature masterpiece that if I visit you, Laurie is going to make for me or cook for me?
I I do a really great wild mushroom pappardelle, short ribs, and I make really good scones. I make blueberry scones. I make them at Christmas time for my family.
Totally. I need to check when is the next flight to California.
I
Family is away next 2 weeks, so I'm coming. Right. On a lighter note, what's on your bucket list?
would love to go to the Alsace region of France. That is one place I really want to go next. I live in a wine country region and have a great appreciation for wine. France has some, world-renowned wines, of course, and well known for its place on the world map of wine excellence. that Alsace region has some lovely wines that I'd like to try. It's especially their whites, sort of that region between France and Germany. It's on the French side. From the pictures, it looks beautiful. The products that I've had from there are always lovely. I would just like to go explore and see what's there.
Totally. I was there this April. Laurie.
Oh,
Oh my God, I didn't realize one of my friend because because of Brexit and stuff, one of my friend schoolmate actually. So she moved to France and she has been inviting me a long time. And I thought Easter break I went there. So they live in a vineyard. That's their own vineyard. And when I went there, my God, it's amazing. They have wine for breakfast, wine for lunch, wine for dinner. In between, they drink wine, but it's like so clear. You won't feel drunk at all. It's amazing. I mean, next time if you do plan it, let me know. I'll take you there.
okay. You got it.
So, what historical event or a time period would you like to go back if you have a time machine and experience?
I would love to see the Gilded Age period. I think the time of sort of steam engines, and it was sort of before we completely gave up horses, but we had a little bit of we had some locomotion going on with vehicles and things. There, it's it's sort of this grand time that you see written about in books and the history books, and the outfits that people wore were beautiful, and the art was interesting. It was back when we still before we had sort of industrialized everything that we build. There was a lot of thought and creativity still applied. I love that. I would like to see that period.
Totally. I think, yeah, that's so true. So true. So, where is the most beautiful place you have ever visited, or what is the most beautiful place you ever visited?
Oh, for me, it's almost anywhere with green and water. Like Yosemite is beautiful. I love the Yosemite Valley, or up on Half Dome looking over the valley. I did hike up Half Dome. That was amazing. Or Mount Vernon looking out of the Potomac. I love I love those two areas. Or France. I went to Paris, and Paris I find Paris to be just a lovely city. It's busy, it's urban, it's not your green and water, but architecturally just fascinating and lovely. I think
Lot.
those are my top few areas.
So, what's in your music playlist at the moment, and what's your go-to karaoke song?
I've never done karaoke. I don't know that I even want to do karaoke. That just feels like, oh, I would rather give a speech um, any day of the week and twice on Sunday. In my playlist though, I've got a mix that is, if you know the movie Midnight in Paris,
Uh-huh.
it's sort of that Paris swing kind of feel. The mix has Madeline Peyroux, Ella Fitzgerald, Harry Connick Jr., um, kind of that vibe. It's got that sort of feel of sort of, oh, just relax and enjoy, and you think Parisian swing kind of feel, not entirely, but that a little bit of jazz, but calm and lovely and kind of funky. And yeah, I love that. That's what I've been into right now.
Got it, got it. I think the very first time because I've listened to jazz, but the very first time when I visited New Orleans, that what it really opened me. I mean, like it's like how jazz could be so peaceful.
Yes.
It's yeah, it's surreal. It's only when you make me feel that's one place where I thought I should settle down in this because there is good music, there is good food. That's enough for me. I will stay there.
Sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah, totally, totally. So, are there any odd hobbies or pastimes that you have picked that most people don't know about? Something during COVID?
If it's an I don't have too many odd hobbies. I do make I do make liqueur every year for friends and family at Christmas time. I often make limoncello,
Hey,
and I enjoy. Yeah, I love packaging. So I select the bottles. I usually am selecting the bottles in October, and I design the label, and then I go through the whole making process from October to December, and then the bottling. And I love figuring out what the wrapping presentation concept's going to be. So last year, I think it was cranberry. I did a cranberry liqueur. Most years it's limoncello, but on occasion I stray a little bit to a different type. But that's a really fun hobby for me. A little
So
different.
I think as long as you enjoy, which it seems to be, and it sounds like very relaxing as well, because obviously it could be, I'm sure you're very organized and disciplined, but it's much more interesting. So if you could, I know I had this question, you already answered it. If you could instantly become an expert in something completely out of your facilities field, what would it be, Laurie? I can.
I would love to be a really great drummer.
A drummer?
I know. Percussion is so interesting. I love percussion. I'm fascinated by the drums. I love them. Whether they're in a Scottish band or a marching band or a jazz band or a rock concert, I love drums.
You tried?
No, I've never been on a drum set. I I yeah, I keep a beat, but my hands tapping my toes, that kind of thing. Oh, I'm fascinated by good drummers.
Oh God, I mean, like, maybe before next time, or maybe we meet face to face, in one of the workplace futures, I would ask you this question, and I'm expecting you to say, "I did try learning."
I sat at a drum set.
Exactly, it'll be good. So, have you tried a food? Obviously, you love cooking. You do much more as a professional level. Have you ever tried a food that you thought, nah, you'd hate it, but ended up loving?
Yeah, I've tried some weird things that I thought I'm gonna do it because I am here and I'm doing this. I tried ant eggs in Mexico. I was with some colleagues there, and they asked me if I ever had had ant eggs, and I thought they were joking.
Mm.
And I said, "Oh, don't be silly." And it turns out it was on a menu, and we were in a very nice restaurant. And finally, I just thought, you know what? Surrender to the moment, eat the ant eggs, and not bad. I wouldn't say it turned me into an instant convert of loving it, but it's not something we see on menus where I live. But I thought I could eat this again, no problem. I ate chicken feet one time. That was another one that I thought I never thought I would have that. But again, I was in a part of the world where that's something that's very common, and I told my friend, like, I want to eat something local. Let's have what would you normally order? And he said, well, chicken feet. And I said, well, all right, let's do it. And again, not bad. It's a lot of information there when you eat it, but
No, I mean, like totally.
that was interesting.
Most of the time I don't ask for what I'm eating. I'll eat it then.
Yeah.
Okay. But if I know what I'm eating, then yeah, that image sort of comes in, especially when you travel around Southeast Asia, where many of the things seems to be very common. But then the moment you realize the snack, they eat crickets and snails and stuff, it's like,
Yes.
it's like, but when you eat it, it doesn't mean it's just like normal. It's very chewy, it's very crunchy. But it's
Exactly. I had curried goat once. I had that in Trinidad, and I think it was the first time I'd ever had goat. I was not sure what to think about that,
yes.
but oh my gosh, it was so good. It was so delicious. That was wonderful. That was one that I thought if I could go back to that place again and have that curried goat, I would do it in a heartbeat. That was delicious. And I realize goat is probably for many people that's like, really, Laurie, that's not news. But to me it was a little exotic.
I'm really happy that you are willing and you're happy, to try all these things. Sometimes we live in a world today where everything is constrained, and and also, I mean, like the number of what we call the allergies that we have,
Mm.
lot more than what it used to be 20 years, which means, I mean, like my youngest has peanut allergy, which means, we need to be very, very careful. But I'm so blessed that, as you rightly said, we could go back and try all these food without worrying about what's going to happen to us. That's amazing. So, which wild animal would you most want as a pet if you had the choice?
Well, my favorite wild animal is a bear.
Huh.
Um, I don't know if it's wise to keep a bear as a pet. That feels a little cruel, but I love bears. They're so smart, and I think just interesting creatures. I'm drawn to bears for whatever reason. I've liked them since I was a very small child. I think a bear would be, if I had to pick a wild animal to pal around with, it would
Mm,
be a bear.
so good. So, do you have a favorite myth or a legend or a fairy tale that's like, oh, I wish this could be true?
My favorite fairy tale is Cinderella, as told by Walt Disney in the 1950 cartoon. Um, that's my grandma. When we were kids, we used to camp a lot with my grandparents, and my grandma would tell us stories, and they were out of these old books. I want to say she read out of Grimm's fairy tales, and I think there were some others. And some of the fairy tales were like the ones that are very non-Disney. There was one about the original Cinderella one. There was that when they get to the part about the stepsisters wanting to try on the shoe. Um, so he's probably is going to make the cutting room floor here. The stepsister, the first one, she can't get her foot into the shoe, but she's so desperate that she decides to cut off her toe,
Oh,
and she puts her foot into the shoe and it fits. But a dove, I think it was a dove in the distance, cries, to who, there is blood in the shoe. And
mm,
she's found out and therefore ineligible. And so they move to the next sister, and that sister also can't get her foot in. And so she cuts off a part of her heel. As a small child hearing this, I was a little horrified. And but you're sort of fascinated. Your grandmother's telling you the story. And the dove cries the same thing, to who, there is blood in the shoe. And so she is disqualified, and eventually it makes it around to Cinderella, and I forget how. But those are the stories I remember from childhood. Some of them just a little. You talk about the Grimm's fairy tales, very very grim. So I like the Disney telling of it, but there's something sort of lovely and justifying about a girl who's been treated wrongly and poorly and shabbily, and ends up things are made right, and she finds her true love. Not that I think that that's everybody's story, but there's something just lovely and romantic about that, and
yes.
I love that story.
Totally, totally. It's only when you're talking to you, I once told a Russian fairy tale to my son, and obviously, son, he just come, Dad, there's no logic in the story. I'm like, this is a fairy tale, for heaven's sake. It's just like 6 years old, questioning logic, and I'm like, you grow up in life. There is no logic. What's going to happen to you? Anyway,
Oh, that's a child that sounds like he's on a way to a STEM career.
exactly. Because me being an electrical engineer, it's as I told you, it's only after finishing electrical engineer, I realized, you know what, this is not what I want to do. I need to do something else. But yeah, that's what most probably he's going to do, I think. So
Yeah.
perfect. And the last question before we close is, what movie or a TV show can you watch over and over again without getting bored?
Oh, um, I love my favorite movie.
Hmm.
I've watched Cinderella a million times, but my number one favorite movie is it's an old Cary Grant and Irene Dunn movie. It's a romantic comedy
Yes.
from, I think it's 1939. It's old black and white. It's called My Favorite Wife. I love that movie. I do not get tired of that movie.
Mm,
Um, I watch White Christmas. I used to watch it throughout the year. I haven't seen it in a while, but every Christmas we watch that. And A Philadelphia Story. That's another Cary Grant one. It's Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. Those are a few movies that I have watched. Oh, and The Hunt for Red October. Oh, how could I forget that? That is a great story. When my cousins sometimes will come over, and he and I kind of bond over puzzles and movies and talking, and so when he comes over, usually one of the first things we do is put that movie on, and it often plays in the background, but the two of us can quote that thing. We know the music. It's some of that is it's the experience of the story, but it's also the shared experience of another person who enjoys it as much as you do. I find that really fun.
Totally, totally. Again, thank you for sharing. And it's so beautiful to see the other side of Laurie. Thank you for sharing, Laurie. Laurie, who has been the biggest motivation to talk us through the people in your life? Biggest mentors, influencers from childhood, career, life, and how did they impact you?
Well, the obvious ones are my family that I'm very, very close to. But I had, there's a teacher that sticks out. My fifth grade teacher, her name was Mrs. Mers.
Mm,
And Mrs. Mers was really good at figuring out what was unique and special about each kid. And so for me, she selected me to give a speech we were always giving speeches in Mrs. Mers's class. And for a kid who was just terrified of being in front of people, that
mm,
was a little bit of stress every time. My heart would pound, and oh my gosh, I hated it. But she selected me to give we used to have we'd have history day, and you had to dress up like a historical character and write a speech about that historical character. It needed to be memorized, and I remember I memorized that speech. I was Priscilla Mullins Alden, who was a pilgrim who came over, and it was history day in November, so it was appropriate. Anyway, I gave my presentation in front of the whole school assembly. That was Mrs. Mers gently nudging and encouraging and saying, "You can do this." And
mm,
so, and she did that for a lot of kids. So for me, she, I think she really helped me see a different capability than I would have otherwise recognized. And another teacher after that, he used to always, Mr. Plessé, he made us give a lot of speeches. And there was one speech I gave. It was a report on monkeys. And we were timed. We had to be no, we had to be between 2 and 3 minutes. It was points off if you exceeded 3 minutes, points off if you were less than two, and you had to be succinct. So one of our peers would be timing us. They would draw names out of a hat, and it was always sort of mildly terrifying. If you were one of the first to go, it was horrific because you were one of the first to go. But then it was over with. But if you didn't get selected, it was sort of like, oh, reprieve. But then you knew your time was coming. It might not be today, it might be tomorrow because we had to get through the whole class. But I learned a lot. I remember that monkey speech. He stopped the class at the end of the speech, and he said, "That is the best presentation I've heard all year." And I remember just mental jaw dropping and thinking, really? And then thinking, what did I do? Whatever I did, I need to do that again. So he was very influential. I had another teacher, Dr. Gordon, in college, who was so very encouraging and really good. He was a funny, engaging professor. He taught heat transfer and thermodynamics, and he factored in really in a number of instances in my college career. So
mm.
those are some of the early influences.
And gradually, when you move into your career, who are your influencers or mentors in your career and also life?
There's that that one friend of mine, facility manager, who encouraged me to get into facility management. In IFMA, there are some fellows that have been very instrumental in my growth. I'll give you three names immediately. There's John Martins, Tina Schaus, and Chris Hodges. Those three are either they've been in for one reason or another, they've been influential, supportive, helpful, and a part of what I've become and that sort of journey through my career.
Mm. So much blessings in your life, Laurie, and I wish a lot more blessings come to your way. So I know, while you're talking through, there could be some challenges that might have also happened during your career. Was there ever a moment you said, what, I want to give up, and but you decided not to? How did you push through that self doubt or challenges to achieve to where you are?
Oh, and one of the things I've learned is that failure is a really great teacher. It's not fun to go through difficult times. It is awful. And there are times there's some things I've gone through where I've just thought, I don't know how I'm gonna ever make it through this. But you do. And some of that you borrow from the strength of others. They encourage you. I think you don't always have the inner strength. Sometimes you just it's sort of what's the Winston Churchill quote, when you're going through hell, keep going. And sometimes it feels like that, where you've got something that's just not great happening, whether it's personal or professional or whatever. It is hard. For me, I think the advice I've almost always gotten, there's always encouragement from other people and experience. People will share their tough experiences. And sometimes you can see that and think, okay, it's not just me. It's, other people go through this too. I can, I can go forward, and you're never alone, but you do have to keep moving. And I think that's another bit of advice that I've had along the way is keep moving. Don't stall out, but keep moving, keep learning, keep pressing forward. And and eventually some of the difficulties they tend to resolve, not always in the best way that you want, but they'll resolve and you will get through it. So I think that's one of the things I do tend to try to keep in front of me. But boy, when you're going through tough times, it is not always easy to see.
Totally, Laurie. I think you kind of made it, very realistic, because sometimes it's easy to talk in an utopian world, like, challenges teach you life lessons and all the world. It's tough, and you go through it and you're definitely going to come out of it. But that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. So, you know, you started as an instructor in IFMA, shared all these things, went all the way into chair, past chair, currently. If you could look back, to the current young professionals, both male and female, considering a career in facilities management, what message would you like to give it back to them?
there's there's a few pieces of advice that I've tended to pass on. Sort of the good advice is something that should always be passed on. One is always give people a graceful out. My sister my sister told me that a long time ago. And another thing is that I usually say to young students is worry less about what you're going to get, worry more about what you give. I see a lot of, particularly people on the earlier side of their careers, so concerned about things like my salary, my opportunities, my title, and I'm not being promoted fast enough, or I'm not getting enough money. And sometimes I look at it and think, well, you don't really know that much just yet. And you may not be able to command what you desire. Maybe someone will give that to you, but experience is a really great teacher, and it takes time to build that. And so my encouragement is get involved and start learning. You will find yourself, when you look back in a few years, you'll find that you have learned quite a lot, you've contributed quite a lot. And those things that you desire, they will come. But if you really focus on something external like money and title, it's a very disappointing end. There will never be enough. And so I think, I look for that something bigger and look to contribute more. Those are a few of the people, or those are the few of the pieces of advice that I think I've carried with me and I tend to pass on.
Very powerful, Laurie. Thank you. Laurie, on the other side, you also have experienced facilities managers. So, how can experienced facilities managers put themselves forward to be volunteers, mentors to the next generation?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's somewhat the same answer. It's worry about what you give, think about what you contribute to others. I think for those who are on the experience side, sometimes we're wondering, have I done enough? Or how can I do more? Am I being recognized? I think for those who have much experience behind them, share it. Take someone alongside you, bring them with you when you go on rounds or when you go visit a facility or you go investigate a situation. Talk about what you do. I taught a class a couple of weeks ago, and what was really interesting is there was there was a gentleman who very clearly, it was a video clip that we were showing in the class. And the guy who was talking through most of it, you could tell that he already kind of knew the answers, but he was talking to a technician and he would say, okay, well, let's look at this piece of equipment. Walk me through, what do you look for every day? Talk to me about, what about this and what about that? And so what's this little button here? And he'd have that person talk him through it. And the reason they were doing that is to help illustrate for those of us in the classroom what a piece of equipment looked like and what you might look for. What I loved about his approach, though, is while he certainly knew everything, he allowed his technician to shine and to talk about and illustrate what he knew. That is another really great thing, I think, for those on the experience side of things, recognizing that you don't have to have all the answers or give all the answers. Sometimes what you need to do is help others find the answers. Um, and sometimes being a good mentor is helping people discover, not giving them the answers. So that's another bit of, I think, wisdom that you kind of learn along the way is helping people discover. Is sometimes one of the things I used to hear, there was an engineer that I worked with years and years ago, and he was a knowledge hoarder. He believed that if he shared his knowledge, it would make him vulnerable to replacement because others would then know what he knew and he wouldn't have a spot. And really it was quite the opposite. He was very needed because he knew so much, but he didn't realize that he was not looked at well because he didn't share. And if he could have shared and been part of the success of the larger group, he would have been so much more valued. And
Mm.
I think sometimes we think sort of at opposites like that. We think if we just hang on to our gift, then we're going to be, people are going to look at us and value the thing that we're hanging on to. And really those gifts should be shared. That's really where the value comes.
Wow, very, very profound. Thank you, Laurie. Laurie, what are you more excited about or hopeful when you look at the future of facilities management?
I'm excited about where we're going. As we talked about earlier about it being a changing profession, one that's always moving and growing and adapting and changing. And when we have our growing pains, as we go through changes, right now we're dealing with cybersecurity and what to do about AI and physical security issues and challenges with technology. But those are, they're also exciting subjects that we get to take on as we step forward. I'm excited about, one thing I'm really excited about is with our changes in technology, it's opening up a lot of doors for language translations. For when you're talking about communicating with others, one of the most challenging barriers we have is language. And language is more than just doing a direct translation on Google. It's translating meaning in a way that people can understand. So, as time marches forward, I see a greater capability for us to make language translations to materials that we have. For IFMA, we've got there's different classes that I teach, and the majority of it is in English and usually 2, 3, 4, 5 languages. Well, there's more people around the globe that want certain kinds of education. English is a really great common language that's common to many, but not to all. Um, and so I think the more we have the ability to get that information to help people learn and grow in their careers, the better. And technology is just helping us get there a little bit faster. So so those are some of the things I'm excited about. It's sort of that like, yeah, we're adapting and changing, and we could fear it, but we could also embrace it and say, all right, let's figure this out. It's not just simply smiling and saying there's no risk. It's saying, yep, there's risk and this can be scary. Change is not always fun. It's hard, but there's something worthwhile. And we know that if we learn and grow, we'll be better for the experience. So I look at that as being part of that exciting experience. I also look at the outcomes that we're looking for. It's advancing a profession. Well, how do you advance a profession? Part of that is sharing what you know. And how do you share what you know? Well, part of that is communication. So So those vehicles that we're walking through, I think those are exciting capabilities that we're seeing come to better fruition than what we've had before.
Totally, Laurie, totally. Laurie, successful career, contribution, sharing so much in your life so far. What's next for you? What's Laurie looking forward to in the immediate future?
Well, this year is my past chair year, so I'm looking forward to playing a support role in IFMA. And I look forward to continuing to contribute. It's in the future, it's going to look a little bit, it won't be quite so direct with board involvement. That's winding down. But I don't see myself backing off in my contribution around the built environment. I'm involved in a number of different things like the Decarbonization Collaborative. I'm working with ASHRAE. With my mechanical engineering background, that's really been a good bridge between IFMA and ASHRAE. So I plan to play a key role there. I plan to get back more into instruction. I have enjoyed that, but during board service, it's not the primary thing that you really need to be paying attention to. There's other things that you've got to take on. So I think it'll be good to get back to that. And continuing to help facility managers with their challenges that they face. That's a continuous thing. It's just a matter of figuring out what's the new challenge and what's around the bend. And and I don't know what it is, but I know it's going to be something that needs to be solved, and I'll get to have some fun with my team digging into it.
Totally, Laurie. I think looking back on your retirement day, whenever that is, what legacy or impact that Laurie wants to leave behind in the facilities management industry as the last question?
I hope that when it feels very, very deep and poignant. I hope when people think about me and the impact that I've had, that I hope they'll think of something like, I learned this from you. It's sort of like the teachers that I had where they definitely made an impression on me, whether it was saying you did a good job in that presentation or what have you. I think if someone can say, okay, that class I took with you, that really made me think about whatever, and it changed my trajectory. You never know what mark you're leaving with people. You always hope it's a good one. But I hope people will say that they learned something, or they were encouraged to do something for having been around me or with me or what have you. I hope, whatever it is, I hope I inspire them to move forward in their career.
Wow, you're 100%. You have inspired me, and I'm sure every listener who will be listening to that will be inspired. Thank you, Laurie. Laurie, is there any part of your life or career, or is there anything else you would like to share to the listeners before we close the episode?
Oh my goodness, I feel probably way overshared here. I think you've kind of gone down the path, so like wrung out my head here, and a lot of editing needed.
No. Thank you so much, Laurie. Wish you, your family, everybody, all the good health and happiness. Continue to inspire us, continue to share, and continue to be the beacon of hope that you always are. Thank you. Listeners, as we wrap up this enlightening conversation, let's all take a moment to reflect on the wealth of insights and experiences and the sharing that Laurie has generously did with us. The world of FM, as she mentioned, is ever evolving, and leaders like Laurie show us the passion, dedication, and the love and the spirit of continuous learning. We can only navigate this landscape, but also to shape its future. So be inspired, stay curious, and remember that every story like Laurie's can be a catalyst for your own success. Thanks for being with us at Baachu Talk FM. Stay driven, and I'll see you at the next episode. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Baachu.